I think the simplicity of the new iPad mini is the best feature about it. There's no ProMotion or 120Hz screen, OLED technology, or Thunderbolt port or 8-core GPU. There's no fancy bells and whistles, but there's also no false promises. It's a simple all-round device that has a place in almost any household. And to start off this video, let's talk about the purpose of this particular iPad. So for me personally, it's mainly centered around content consumption. So for sitting on the couch watching YouTube or browsing, or even reading an ebook. But it can also function as a great tool for students and professionals and can pack a surprising amount of power when you need it. For example, it's definitely not underpowered, even when compared to Apple's latest and greatest, the M1 iPad Pro lineup. Now, one cool feature I really wanted to touch on is TouchID on the lock button. This is the first time we've seen this technology on an iPad, and I have to say, I'm really enjoying it. You can flip the iPad and use it in landscape or portrait mode by adding different fingers, and it just works really well, just as well as a traditional TouchID sensor on an iPhone. Now, coming from an M1 iPad Pro with Face ID, I didn't really enjoy Face ID on an iPad because very often when I'm using an iPad, I'll just have it sitting flat on a desk or a table like this, and I'll just tap it and do some stuff on it. But I can't do that with Face ID unless I lift it up and hold it in front of my face, or I put the passcode in. And guys, passcodes are so last decade. It's the 20s now, so we want to use the high-tech stuff like Touch ID and Face ID. Now, I will say that lock button Touch ID will take a little bit of getting used to, especially if you're coming from the traditional version of Touch ID, but it only takes a few days to get used to and get that muscle memory into your system. And yes, you can still use tap to wake. That still works perfectly fine. Now, moving on to the screen, it's an 8.3-inch IPS display, so you're not getting that OLED or mini LED technologies that we're seeing in some other devices these days, but at the end of the day, it is a really tiny 8.3-inch screen, so you're probably not gonna notice the difference that much anyway. I know for me personally, if I sit this side by side an M1 iPad Pro, the difference is really only noticeable in certain situations. Now, a quick side note to the screen, it's actually really comfortable to hold and also to type on and play games with. The bezels aren't the most aesthetic thing, but they are necessary to actually hold the iPad and use it, and the Mini's bezels aren't too small or too big. Now, for some apps and games, there is an additional bezel on the sides, but again, I really didn't find it that intrusive. Now, the iPad mini only has a 60Hz screen, so you're not gonna get that really high refresh rate of 120 plus hertz that we are seeing on some other devices. But honestly, unless you're specifically coming from a 120Hz tablet, you're probably not gonna notice a massive difference, or at least you're not gonna miss it. And for the types of apps and programs and games you're gonna be doing on this machine, I don't really think 120Hz would have been the right choice. Now, moving on to form factor, and I think this is one of the biggest pros that the iPad mini has going for it. Now, in terms of size, here's a quick shot of it next to a 13-inch M1 iPad Pro. You can see there it's almost a quarter of the size, and that's going to allow you to put this thing pretty much anywhere. So for example, if you're a mother and you've got a kid, you can put this bad boy in your bag or probably even your purse, or if you're a doctor, you can put it in your lab pocket, or if you're a pilot, for example, you can strap it to your knee and you're good to go. Now, if you're a student, this has the potential to be a bit of a game changer because instead of taking in a laptop or a bag or textbooks or notepads or anything like that into your lecture, if you want to do some notes, you can probably get away with this being your only device and scribbling a few notes or bringing up a few lecture slides on here during your lecture. And at the end of the lecture, you can probably just shove it in your back pocket and you'll be good to go. Now, in my opinion, I don't believe the screen is too small. I think it's actually a perfect size. And I have seen some people out there complaining about the size, saying it's too small. And I don't understand that because it's clearly advertised as a mini iPad, an 8.3-inch screen. It's kind of like buying a 13-inch MacBook and then complaining that 13 inches is too small. Now, moving on to performance, and without getting into the nitty-gritty details, It does almost everything you would want to do on an 8-inch tablet, and it does it pretty well. For reference, here's how it stacks up to the M1 iPad Pro. And that is pretty impressive in my opinion, because you're probably not going to be editing videos or doing anything too intensive on the iPad mini. And this also allows the battery life to be really respectable on this thing. So I'm getting about the same as the other reviewers are getting, about 8 to 10 hours on a single charge. Again, that is dependent on what exactly you're doing on this thing. So if you're gaming, it's gonna be less, around 6 or 7, maybe even 5 hours. But if you're web browsing or listening to some music, you're probably gonna get the full 10 hours. Now, while we're on the topic of performance, there is a noticeable difference in gaming performance between this and the M1 iPad Pro. Now, this is obviously because this only has a 6-core CPU and a 5-core GPU, and the GPU and CPU just aren't quite as powerful as the M1 in the iPad Pros, which obviously has an 8-core GPU. So you're obviously going to get a lot higher performance in gaming on the iPad Pro. And in my experience, it was quite noticeable, especially in games like Genshin Impact or Call of Duty Warzone. You're gonna be getting a little bit of stuttering, and you're probably not gonna be quite reaching that 60 Hertz, really smooth refresh rate on this device. It will struggle a little bit. So if you are looking at doing a lot of gaming on this thing, I would fork out the extra $300 to get the 11-inch M1 iPad Pro. But that being said, if you are just a casual gamer and you're not too fussed about the performance, this thing will still perform very well. Now, moving on to storage, and this is something I wanted to cover as well, because the storage options on this are a little bit strange. So the entry-level device starts at just 64 gigabytes, which you're gonna fill up pretty quickly depending on what you do on this device. And something with 64 gigabytes of storage might be okay for, say, a phone, but on this device, you're probably gonna be doing a lot of gaming. You're gonna download a lot of big apps to it, maybe have some photos on here, and 64 gigabytes is going to fill up very quickly. Now, Apple curiously does not have a 128 gigabyte option. You've only got the 64, and then you have to bump all the way up to 256. Now, this doesn't make a lot of sense to me personally, because this is an entry-level iPad aimed mostly at kids and adults looking to consume content. Now, this decision was clearly on purpose by Apple, because they do have the 128 gigabyte SSDs in the M1 iPad Pros, so perhaps they're just looking to subconsciously upsell you. But in reality, it's probably just to simplify the buying process. For most people, 64 gigabytes will be fine, but if you really do need that extra storage bump, that option is available for you as well. Now, moving on to pricing, this base model iPad mini is $499, which I think is actually going to price a fair few people out, because at the end of the day, this is a relatively entry-level, small mini tablet. And I think if Apple reduced the price by about $50, a lot more people would be interested. That being said though, $329 for the new 10-inch iPad is a great deal, and is obviously Apple's budget choice for price-conscious consumers. Now, also bear in mind that while the base model 64 gigabyte mini is $499, don't forget that if you are willing to pay an extra $300 or $799, you can bump up to the 11-inch base model of the M1 iPad Pro, which starts at 128 gigabytes of storage. So if you need more storage than 64 gigabytes, or you need a little bit more performance for gaming or sketching or editing, that's gonna be a really tough decision in my opinion. And I think a lot of people will end up going for the base model 11-inch M1 iPad Pro. So all in all, I think this is a really solid device in Apple's lineup. I think a lot of people are going to be picking this up and they're going to be very happy with it, especially because we haven't had an iPad mini refresh for a couple of years now. I think this is really a no-brainer for people that want a small form factor tablet with respectable power and the Apple ecosystem to match.